are in listen-only mode.
Greetings. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining this webinar today. My name is Jason Lauritsen. I am thrilled to be here with you today. We're going to talk about engagement and accountability today and trying to unlock where employee performance really comes from. And so we're going to spend the next hour or so together. And before we kick off our discussion or our conversation here, I do want to note a couple of housekeeping items. One is you'll notice on your panel when you logged in that you should have an option there to sort of labeled questions, and if you click that or click the plus sign next to it, it'll pop down and it gives you a window in which you can type me questions at any time throughout, and I would encourage you to do that. Chances are if there's a question that pops into your mind, it's probably a question that's in the minds of several people listening, so please don't hesitate to ask questions. I love getting questions along the way. It lets me know that you're paying attention and that you are pulling apart and thinking about the information I'm presenting. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. I love a tough question. So I would invite you to do that. You can also use the chat function if you'd like at any point to chat either with me or with each other. That should be right under your question functionality as well. So feel free to engage. I also have my my contact information here, both my email address and my Twitter handle, so that if you happen to have to drop off during this session, or some kind of fire erupts around you in your workplace you have to attend to, but you want to catch the rest of this, please drop me an email. We are recording the session, and we'll make that available to you happily, so drop me an email or shoot me a message on Twitter and we'll make that happen. So thank you again for joining. If you are interested, this is what I look like. I promise I won't make you look at that more than just this, but just so you know who I am a partner with Bulletproof Talent. For those of you that make it all the way through the gauntlet, I will tell you a little bit about who we are at the end of our presentation today if you're curious kind of what we're up to. So with that all aside, housekeeping done, let's dive into why we're here. And we're here today to talk about, sort of the question that we posed is it engagement or is it accountability? Really, what is it that's driving employee performance? And the reason that we put this title or this topic forward today is that we're a little concerned by the amount of, I guess, energy or sort of confidence that we as industry, as an HR and management profession, have sort of put upon employee engagement, or sort of the measure of employee engagement as being kind of our holy grail in HR. It seems like over the last number of years we've talked about employee engagement as if it's sort of we've arrived at it as the answer, that if we only can find a way to improve engagement, to make engagement better within our organizations, that's the key to unlocking performance. And we think that's, I guess, a little bit of a dangerous leap to make. And I think that there's some problems with that leap. And we see a lot of organizations and a lot of people putting a lot of time and money into engagement programs under the assumption or belief or confidence, I guess, that engagement investment will result in performance. And we think that's might be a dangerous place to be. And so what we're going to talk a little bit about today is perhaps, if we look a little bit closer at the practice of employee engagement, we think that there are some ways that perhaps we could improve what we're doing, and that if we look closer and really think about engagement, what it is, and its link to performance, that we may discover that there's a piece missing, and that's why we're not seeing the performance that we want out of our employees. And so we have to start this conversation sort of with a very simple question, which is, as we've sort of been in pursuit of this promise of performance through engagement, we generally go to some kind of a survey instrument to survey and measure for engagement. And so the question is, why do we do that? Why do we survey for engagement? And when we ask HR professionals and leaders across the country about this simple question, we hear a lot of things like, well, we want our employees to be happy, and we want our employees to stick around, and we want to retain our employees. But the reality is the only really right answer to this question is that we survey because we need to drive business results. right? The connection, that's why we went down this path. I mean, if you're like me, I've worked for for-profit enterprises my entire life. The reason that we want our employees to be more engaged is to produce a better quality outcome for our organization, to produce better business results. Anything other than that means we're sort of pointed in a wrong direction. And so we have to start by remembering that this is about results. It's about performance. Engagement in and of itself doesn't do anything unless it's pointing in that direction. So knowing that it's about results, I wanted to start by just sharing a quick story from my own experience. This goes back to when I was a director of talent for an organization, several hundred employees, and we were in a process of kind of a turnaround initiative. It's a company that had been, we'd had some struggles. We knew we needed to make some improvements. And as the organization was going through a series of process improvement initiatives, HR wanted to be a part of the solution as well. And so one of the things we recommended or brought forward was the suggestion that we should do an employee engagement survey. Made sense that if we were going to work on sort of the actual business process side of the business, we should also work on the people process side of the business. And so we implemented a survey. We went out and found a vendor, implemented a survey. The first year we measured and we got our benchmark data. And then from year 1 to year 2, we had our managers sort of work with their results, talk to their teams, build plans. We sort of diligently worked the process. Year 2, we came back, we did our second survey. And we saw good results. Our engagement increased, company performance increased, everybody celebrated, we rejoiced as an HR team. You know, we were contributing, or at least it seemed as if we were. So fast forward to year 3. Between year 2 and year 3, we repeated sort of the diligence and the effort that we had exerted in year 1. We made, you know, even with sort of greater rigor, if you will, we had our managers planning and doing action, you know, engagement planning and working with their teams, and we were holding them accountable for those plans. And in year 3, our engagement went down. And that was sort of it was a shocking revelation for us. But something even more shocking happened was, you know, when our engagement went down, we would have expected, because of what we had sort of come to believe, that engagement was linked or was driving performance, that our company performance had gone down. But in actuality, what happened was that our company performance actually went through the roof. We had the greatest single year of company performance on a performance or a sort of revenue per employee basis that the company had had in its history. And so we were a little troubled, or a little sort of struck by that. And so we started scratching our head, and basically we arrived at, you know, a fairly obvious conclusion, which was obviously something is wrong with this picture. Something was broken in the story that we were sort of told about the linkage between engagement and performance. And so this sort of led, I guess, me a number of years ago to start thinking about and asking a different kind of question about engagement, because it still seemed to us that engagement was a good thing. I mean, certainly employee engagement isn't bad. Getting more engagement is good. But it definitely sort of shattered my belief that engagement was directly causing performance, because if that was the case, then clearly, you know, that this couldn't have happened, what you're looking at on this slide. And so when we start talking about performance, and we're considering it through the lens of what role does employee engagement play in performance, it's important to sort of note that, you know, engagement is good. And there is no question that having engaged employees is good. But the process that we are using to measure and manage engagement is not producing, in all cases, the kinds of results that we're expecting. The story that I just shared with you is not an isolated one. We've heard that story over and over, a similar story. Probably some of you have experienced the same kind of story in your own experience or your own organizations, where perhaps you're working on engagement results and your engagement results continue to go up, but your company performance has sort of flatlined. Or maybe your company performance is going up, but your engagement levels have flatlined. At some point, generally, we hear a story from those that are working these surveys and working these processes that somewhere along the way, the two sort of break from one another. There might be strong correlation the first couple of years, but then something happens. And so we hear this over and over, and so that caused us to really take a look at what's going on there, because it would seem on the surface that engagement should have a positive impact on results, but certainly it's not causing, or at least we didn't think it was. And I'm going to pause just for a second. I got a note asking about getting a link to the slides for the session. I am happy to provide those. We can send a link to that, or I will post those up on SlideShare and send a link. And if you'd specifically like me to send it directly to you, just drop me an email and I'll be happy to send you a copy of those slides afterwards as well. So when we talk about the engagement process, we're talking about this process of surveying employees for engagement. So most of us that have done engagement or have measured engagement in organizations, the process is generally the same. We decide we want to survey. We go find a vendor, or we build our own survey. We deploy the survey out to all employees. We try to get as many of our employees to respond as we can, and then we take that data and we roll it up and we start looking for trends and looking at the results, and maybe we sort by a few demographics and that sort of thing. And then we use that to take action. That's generally sort of the process that most people follow. And when you think about that, the reason we think that there are sort of three faulty or major faulty assumptions that are built into that process that are causing us to lose a lot of the impact that employee engagement could be delivering to us. The first is that we're treating all employee responses as equally credible. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. The second is we believe that perfecting employee circumstances will drive engagement. You'll find in a moment that this is a losing battle. And the third sort of faulty assumption is that sort of this fundamental, foundational belief that engagement drives results. And we're going to challenge that, and we're going to talk about what is actually driving results here in a few minutes. So I'm going to dive into each of these individually just to sort of set the stage for answering this question of, what is really driving performance. So this first flaw, this notion that all employee responses are equally credible, really gets back to how do we, sort of how we treat these surveys. And as we mentioned a minute ago, we're sending out generally surveys, and we send them to every employee, and we want as many employees to respond as possible. And that's rooted in this sort of this idea that somehow, or this belief that we all came to somewhere along the line that, every employee is entitled to their own opinion, right? They're entitled to an opinion, that their opinion should count. And so we treat all of those responses the same when they come back. Everybody gets one vote, and then we average and we tally and we sort those votes. But that sort of assumes that all employees are created equal. And if I put this question to you, are all of your employees created equal? I'm fairly certain that most of you are saying no, or thinking no. Of course they're not. When we talk about, or we think about the value that employees contribute to our organization, we like to think of it on kind of a spectrum. And this spectrum ranges from, on the one end, the employee like this young woman, we call her Deb the driver. But these are the employees that are really driving the business. They have they're demonstrating a high degree of accountability, in that you don't really have to, you give them their number, you give them their expectation, you give them the bar to clear, and they jump over it every time. And usually they jump way over it. And while they're clearing their own bar, they're helping the people around them get better. They think about and offer improvements for how to improve their team or the company, or how the company's serving employees. These are the kind of employees that if you could clone, you would clone an army of them, because these are the employees that make the 80-20 rule work. These are the 20% that are generating 80% of the impact of your organization. On the other end, though, and you'll recognize these people too, we call this young lady Vicky the victim. And Vicky is, we like to think of her, we call her the victim, but she's sort of settled into this victim mentality, that it's sort of the world against her. She doesn't really like your company all that much. She doesn't really like her job all that much, but she continues to show up. Vicky creates drama everywhere she goes. She and those like her keep our company's employee relations departments in business because they're in complaining about their coworkers or their supervisor or their unfair treatment all the time. When Vicki doesn't meet her expectations, it's always because it's someone else's fault. When Vicki does hit her expectations once in a while, she wants a parade and a gold sticker, and then once a year she kind of blackmails you into giving her a 3 on her performance, or an average rating on her performance appraisal, maybe even better than that, or a 3% increase, because she's going to create drama and conflict and go off the handle, and we just want to avoid that. And so we let Vicki sort of hang around, but we know that she's there. She should have been fired a long time ago. We just never got around to it. And so these people we have in every workforce, right? We don't like to acknowledge that there's as many Vickies as there is, but they're there. So the question is, if you were to go out and solicit opinions about how to run your business, how to improve your business, how to make your business better at serving customers, or how to make your business, your workforce more engaging, who would you ask? Now, certainly that is a rhetorical question because it's fairly obvious. You would go ask Deb, right? Deb would tell you how to improve the business for customers. Deb would tell you how to make the environment better for all employees, because Deb sort of treats the organization as if she's an owner. That's how she approaches her work. If you ask Vicki for opinions about how to improve the business, she tells you how to make her situation more comfortable. She tells you about what she needs to be more comfortable. She doesn't so much care about anything beyond that. And so when we look at this and you consider this seems fairly obvious. You know these people. You work with these people. And the interesting thing is that, when I suggest to you that we should differentiate between their opinions in our engagement surveys, sometimes we have a tendency to say, well, we can't differentiate between people's opinions. That sort of rubs us the wrong way at times. But in fact, in our HR processes every day, we differentiate between employees at all levels sort of constantly. We pay people differently based on their perceived value to the organization. In our hiring process, there's people we won't even call because we don't think they're worthy of working for us, or they don't have the right skill set or mix or cultural fit. We differentiate all of the time. So the question is, why are we not differentiating in our engagement survey? This needs to change. And so the first place that we need to sort of really rethink how we're managing our engagement process as we start to connect it back to performance is that if we're going to really use engagement to drive performance, then we need to acknowledge that not all employees are created equal, and that their opinions about the business are not equally credible. And when we treat those opinions the same, that's insane. It's crazy. We need to be paying excruciatingly close attention to the opinions of our drivers, of the 20% that are driving our business forward. And we need to stop paying much, if any, attention to Vicki the victim and her cohort of victims, because they are anchoring the business and holding us back. And so this is sort of the first place that we have to rethink how we're approaching engagement if we want to get to performance, if we want to really turn our engagement process into a driver of results. The second flaw that lives in the sort of engagement process today is this idea that, or this flaw that we think that perfecting an employee's circumstances will actually drive engagement. That's why we ask about things like, tell us about, do you have all the tools you need? Tell us about the environment and the benefits and the pay and all these different things. We ask about all these circumstances, and we sort of invite employees to offer up the excuses for why they may not be engaged. And we get a list. And then what we often do with that list is we take that list and we almost use it as our to-do list, and we go off and we start trying to fix these things. Well, let's consider that a little bit differently for a moment, and let's just apply that same sort of approach to, I'm going to apply it to a situation I know well, and that is let's apply it to a high school student. I happen to have one of these living in my home, and so I know this topic well. But let's say you have a high school student who is underperforming, and in particular is underperforming on sort of writing papers, just as having a tough time getting papers done on time and of the right kind of quality to get decent grades. And so if we use our engagement approach to sort of solve this, we would go survey the employee or the high school student about things, or we'd ask them questions about, tell us about your environment, tell us what you need to do better on your paper, and we would probably be given a list. You can imagine what this list would be. At least mine would probably say, well, if I had my own laptop, if I got a new laptop, that would be helpful because then I'd have a better tool, and it'd be nice if I had a nicer, more comfortable place to sit in my bedroom, maybe a love sack or something like that I could use. Maybe some better lighting and maybe a stereo to play some music that would help me sort of get focused. It'd be helpful if my teacher did a better job of setting expectations, and maybe reminding us more frequently to get our paper done. And you can on and on and on. And they might say, well, and I get stressed about it, so maybe having a little time to spend with my friends would be good. You get a list. And as a parent, if I went and I fixed all of those things, or I bought a laptop and I did all this stuff, do you think that would cause the quality of the papers to improve in and of itself? Now, maybe we would debate this if we were sitting across the table from one another, but I suspect that most of you, especially if you've ever had a teenager in your house or a high schooler in your house, know that the quality wouldn't improve. You would just now have a high schooler with a lot more tools and a better environment delivering the same quality of paper. And then I could circle back around and we could repeat it again. When we do this, when we go and say, hey, we're not getting what we need, can you tell us about what it is around you that's causing you sort of not to perform in the way we expect or the way we'd ideally expect? What we're doing is, instead of driving engagement or driving better performance, what we're in fact doing is creating entitlement. We're creating an expectation that when things go wrong, or when things aren't the way that ideally we'd like them to be, it's generally because I don't have the right stuff. And if I just got more stuff, or if I asked for more stuff, things would get better. Improving circumstances doesn't change things. And the reason for that sort of goes to how we respond to adversity as humans. And when we meet adversity, sadly, the first thing we do generally isn't step up. The first thing we do is quit. Right? At least mentally we quit. You've probably done this. I know I've done it 1,000 times. When you have a really bad day or things aren't going your way, the first thing we think about is quitting. We may fantasize about a new job. We may fantasize about winning the lottery and not having to come back to our job, but we quit. And we have a lot of employees in our organization that do this every day. They mentally quit on us, but the bad part is they keep showing up to work. And when they keep showing up to work, what they do is they BMW drive. And for those of you that aren't familiar with this, it's bitching, moaning, and whining. That's BMW driving. And again, we've set up a whole department within our human resources areas to accommodate BMW driving. We call it employee relations, right? This is where the people that have quit and stuck around come to complain about what's going on around them, to complain about their circumstances. They come in and whine about unfair treatment from their manager, or that their peers, they're not getting along. They always find things in the environment to complain about, and oftentimes because we've come to believe that our job as managers and HR professionals is to make our employees happy, to do what they need to be happy, we try to change their reality. We take it upon ourselves to try to fix these things. So we'll go cause a whole. Do a whole investigation of the work, the workplace, or we talk to their peers or whatever, and we're sort of dealing with, responding to this BMW driving that's caused by the adversity, and it doesn't change anything. All it does is resets, because that same employee, even if you do happen to change that circumstance, they reward you with a new list of circumstances that aren't right. The only sustainable way to change, and the only sustainable way to creating long-term performance, is by changing mindsets. So when we have an employee who is in this situation and maybe complains that, hey, I don't ever get the information that I need. My manager doesn't tell me the information I need to do my job. Well, we could take the approach of if you were a manager or if you're this person's manager, maybe you decide you want to go off and you're going to try and gather all the information they need. You're going to over communicate. You're going to share a whole bunch of information with them. The reality is you are probably never going to give them all the information. You're not going to get them all the information, or you're not going to get them the right information at the right time. The only way to really sustainably change this is by, instead of trying to fix their circumstance, that you instead try to coach them and change their mindset about their responsibility in that, and you teach them how to go find how to find their own information, how to ask you for information when they need it, or where to go to find information, and you coach them on their responsibility in that process to go find that information. And so when we talk about the reality of how do we improve engagement and performance, it's not about circumstances. The only sustainable way to do that is to actually impact the mindset of the individual. And so when we talk about the second flaw, so much of our work comes down to, we end up chasing around trying to improve circumstances. And when we're trying to improve circumstances, when we're trying to sort of give employees the stuff that they tell us they need to be more engaged, what we're doing instead of driving engagement is driving entitlement. And that entitlement thinking then starts to sort of build, and it becomes a bigger and bigger issue for us. And so we need to kind of think about things a little bit differently. And so this brings us to the third design flaw. I'm going to do a quick question check because I believe I have a few questions that have teed up. I'm going to see if I can hit a few of these, so bear with me for a second. All right. A lot of questions. You guys are doing great. So I got that one. Okay, so the question is, sometimes it feels like employees are taking advantage of employers with the engagement game. They've come to expect goodies. Just because they are an employee, it seems like this is a form of blackmail employees engage in, but at the same time, employers, how do we stop the entitlement mentality? And I think part of that is focusing on the mindsets like we talked about. And we're going to get more into this in a moment. So I'm going to defer that question here for a moment. See if there's another question that I can grab, because I think we will answer that one. All right. All right, it looks like many of these I'm going to hit here in a second. So I'm going to hold on these questions because I'm going to I think impact or answer most of those as I go. So thank you for the questions. Keep them coming, and I will come back to those in a moment. And I think maybe I'll come back and clean those up at the end, just because I think I will probably answer a majority of your questions as we go. So let's come back to this third sort of design flaw. And from a design flaw perspective, this is sort of the biggie, because this is sort of the foundation on which this, we've spent most of our investment or time in engagement, is the belief that, or the conviction that engagement is driving results. And there are certainly, some research studies that you can go find, and there are companies that have done research that, will allege that engagement is driving results. But when you look closer on most of those studies, what you will find is one of two things. One is that the engagement driving results is actually kind of an overstatement of a correlation that exists, or that they found, between engagement and results. That when engagement fluctuated, that results were fluctuating on the same sort of cycle in a particular organization with a particular set of employees, or a particular engagement instrument. And so certainly there are engagement, and we wouldn't argue that there are times that engagement and results are certainly correlated. But to sort of make the jump that engagement is driving results is a bigger one. The other thing that you'll find, other than just sort of the correlation, is that it's a very specific kind of, very specific and narrow situations where we're isolating that, we think that engagement is driving results, but it's hard to sort of make the leap to a much broader sort of assertion that engagement is driving results. it's just our experience and our research that we've done suggests something different, so it at least opens up a question in our mind. And so here's where we came to, and I can kind of illustrate, I guess, by using sort of a little story, or I guess a metaphor. For those of you who aren't bird experts, this bird on the left is a stork, which you may have been assuming, and the bird or the image on the right obviously is a baby. And most of you know this sort of story that, or the myth, legend that storks, bring babies. What you may not know is that that legend or myth sort of began hundreds of years ago in northern Europe, where there were areas of northern Europe that they discovered over time that when the stork population increased, that 9 months after that, give or take, the number of babies would increase as well, the number of babies being born. So, and they started to sort of pay attention to this over a period of time, and they would notice that, a lot of storks, a lot of babies, fewer storks, fewer babies. And so they sort of came to believe or assume that there was something about the storks or the stork population that was causing the number of babies to increase. Now, you sit here today and think, gosh, that's ridiculous. How could somebody believe that? But at least according to legend, that's sort of how the story goes. It wasn't until years later that they realized that there was actually a third factor going on, that indeed the number of storks and the number of babies was correlated when you looked at it, and that they were rising and falling together. But what was actually causing that was a third factor. The stork wasn't causing the baby. What was actually going on was the quality of the harvest was actually impacting both. Turns out that storks are migratory birds, and migratory birds will go to where the food is. That's kind of what they do. They're wired for survival. So when an area in northern Europe would have a great harvest, there was lots of food, lots of storks. Turns out when there's a great harvest, that also means that the people are happy, and there's lots of merrymaking going on. And amongst the merrymaking, there's the kind of merrymaking that sometimes involves alcohol, other times involves activity that leads to babies 9 months later. And so that they came to believe that really the thing that was causing both, or what they found the thing was causing both, was the harvest. Now, it appeared on the surface that storks were causing babies, but in actuality, there was sort of a third thing in the background that was impacting both. Our experience has led sort of us to the conclusion that it's not, in fact, engagement that is driving results at the organizational level or employee performance, although on the surface it often seems that that's the case. And in certain situations, certainly the correlations look pretty good, although there are a lot of other situations where the correlations break, doesn't exist. But we believe that there's actually a third factor in the background that's driving both of them. And our experience is that it's personal accountability. And the way we define personal accountability is simply that it is a mindset that results happen because of one's actions, not in spite of them. In essence, a personally accountable person, a person that has high personal accountability, really believes that, that whatever happens to them or around them is a result of their own actions, right? That they are fully accountable for the good and the bad that happens to them. And so personal accountability, when you think about that just on the surface, when we understand, I guess let me back up. When we think about accountability, we've in the business context, we've really taken accountability and sort of made it into, sort of boxed it into a narrow definition, which is, will I stand up and take a bullet when things go wrong? We talk about holding people accountable for, wrongdoing or for poor results. We also talk about sort of people taking accountability when they do things wrong or when things fail. But personal accountability is so much bigger than that. And so to really understand that, it's important to break it down sort of into what goes into making personal accountability and why personal accountability has such a significant impact on an individual and organization's results. So personal accountability really is a result of 4 factors: commitment, resilience, ownership, and continuous learning. And here's kind of how those factors work together in order to create this mindset of accountability. And it all starts with commitment. Commitment is the willingness to do whatever it takes to get results. It's really We like to think of it as a forward-leaning, sort of a very forward-leaning kind of posture towards results, towards your work, towards your effort, is that you're sort of off balance towards really making things work. You're all in. We hear this in sports oftentimes when they'll critique athletes. They talk about certain athletes that really put in the time in the weight room and doing film study and getting prepared mentally and physically and ready for games. And other athletes aren't nearly as committed. They don't put the time and effort in the way that others do. So commitment is really removing all of the potential future excuses really on the front end by deciding that we're going to do whatever it takes. Then it's followed by resilience. So once we're committed, resilience is really what keeps us in the game. It helps us sort of deal with obstacles and setbacks along the way. The mental image I use for resilience are those old sort of Bozo the Clown blow-up animals that with the weights in the bottom that we had as kids, that you could stand with that Bozo and just punch him and punch him and punch him and punch him and all day long, and Bozo would go down and pop right back up, tip over and pop right back up, and it didn't matter how many times you hit Bozo, Bozo was always going to come back. You were going to get tired before Bozo gave up, and that's really what resilience at the end of the day looks like. The third factor is ownership, and ownership is probably what you have come to understand or think about when you think about accountability. Ownership is that part of accountability that's about do I really take ownership for my role in what happens to me and around me? Can I account for my role in that? And so ownership's the part that we really understand, good or bad, right? Do I own up to the part of that I played? And then finally, and this piece is critically important, this fourth factor is continuous learning. And it's something I think we often overlook as a part of personal accountability, but continuous learning is essentially paired with ownership, and that when I take ownership for my role in something, whether it be good or bad, do I turn that into learning? Do I turn that into a lesson or rule of thumb, and then commit to those lessons in the future so that I can sustain my results, so I'm not making the same mistakes over and over again? So this is accountability, and you can see when you think about this and you look at this that with commitment and resilience, ownership and continuous learning, that just at a very sort of high level, or even just sort of a common sense level, that when you have an individual that's practicing personal accountability, the accountability component individually sort of means that they're drawn or compelled towards meeting and exceeding expectations. That's just, that's sort of almost implied in this definition. But it also means that they are sort of predisposed towards engagement. A person that is highly personally accountable, just sort of by their nature, is committed to the organization, right? They're sort of all in because that's the only way they know how to be. And so by cultivating personal accountability, you can get an impact on both your engagement and your business performance and your business results. And so really, this is sort of this is really where we get to the answer to the question we posed at the beginning of this session, or sort of in the title, which is it engagement or accountability that's really driving performance? And our belief is that it really is the personal accountability, is that if we were to shift our efforts from trying to sort of cultivate engagement to cultivating personal accountability, that we would see improvements in engagement that were more sustainable over time, but that we would also see improvement in results. Because engagement I think engagement is a very important thing. It's just important to be managing it and measuring it in a way that makes sense and that is based in the reality that there are certain people driving your business forward and that are more important to keep engaged than others. And so basically, if we sort of, acknowledge all of these flaws that we've talked about, right? If we acknowledge all of those things, then it certainly means that when it comes to engagement, we need to be doing something a little bit different. And our recommendation is basically that you need to be cultivating accountability, is that the sustainable way to impact engagement long term in a way that impacts results is to develop and cultivate accountability, to bring accountability into your employee engagement process, your employee engagement efforts. And so we came prepared with sort of a list of recommendations. I have 5 recommendations for how you do that to kind of get you started. So let's start with the first. First recommendation is really to stop surveying the victims. And so, this goes back to, if we acknowledge that employees are not created equal, then when it comes time to survey for engagement, we need to step back and remember that engagement at the end of the day is a research process. Too many of us have turned it into a number, so we're chasing an engagement number year after year, and it's really not about that number. That number is arbitrary. What really matters is the information that we get back, and what can we do with that information to improve and impact the results of the organization. And one of the most powerful ways to impact that is to find a way to start differentiating between the opinions of your most valuable employees in the organization and be able to separate those out so you pay very close attention to those, and how to also sort of separate out the opinions of your least valuable, your victims and your entitled, your folks that are stuck in kind of an entitlement mindset. And you want to set those aside and not pay a lot of attention, because frankly, we don't want to make that group more comfortable. We hope they're uncomfortable because we'd love to see them sort of take their drama someplace else. And so we don't want to sort of be working on that end of the spectrum. And so how do you do that? There's a variety of ways to do that. Obviously, we believe the most sustainable or the best way is to really zero in on accountability. Obviously, disclaimer, you knew coming into this that we're heavy into accountability. We have a tool that does that, but there's a lot of ways you can do this internally. So you can, one of the ways that you could do this is take each group that you have within your organization and have your managers or your leaders stack rank your employees by their value or their accountability level. You could also, if you feel pretty good that your performance management system is objective and is effective, you could potentially use your performance management system to also sort of create a differentiation so that you could take that data and build it into the background of your survey, so that when you do your survey, you can then, on the back end when you're sorting and pulling reports, that you can sort of pull the top 20% from your bottom 20% and compare, see what you see. So that's number one. Number 2 is to fix the right stuff. And what this is sort of geared at is, this is really, sort of coming out of this idea of, are we fixing circumstances and chasing circumstances and sort of creating entitlement? So the suggestion here is that if you're doing a traditional survey, your engagement survey, and you get your results back, when you get your list of things that appear, that sort of the survey suggests are things you should work on or that maybe need to be fixed, whether it be organizationally or departmentally, I would take that list and go to a group of your employees who are your drivers, right? Who are your obvious drivers, who are obvious value. Who some of those people are. Get a group of them together, go to them one-on-one, and talk to them about what the survey said to find out whether it resonates with them that those things seem to need to be fixed. The things that the employee overall is saying, or that the survey overall is saying is a problem, does it feel like a problem to them? The point is here to get a second opinion, to make sure that the employees that matter to you the most, that they sort of validate for you that what the survey says is a problem actually is a problem that you should invest in, that it matters to them. If it doesn't, then it may be something you maybe just want to set that off to the side, because you don't know, if you're not differentiating between your drivers and your victims and sort of all the employees in the middle, you don't have a way of knowing for sure whether you're listening to the voice of your victims or whether you're listening to the voice of your drivers. So do some double checking, right? Check your sources, check your data. The other thing here is to remember that sustainability in driving performance is about changing mindsets, not changing circumstances. And so when you see, if you see, every survey generally will come back and say that there's some issue with communication. Not enough communication. Well, communication is a two-way street. If it wasn't, it would be called broadcasting. We broadcast one direction. Communication goes two ways. And so when we hear that communication is broken, understand that, or that it's not working, that part of that's a shared responsibility. And don't forget that, yes, there may be some organizational things that need to be addressed, but we also need to be coaching the employees and helping them understand that they're a participant in this, teaching them how to communicate, helping coach them on how to get some of what they need and take responsibility for some of that. Our third suggestion is to start action planning differently. And so you can add, this is where you can really mix in accountability and start to introduce this notion that, employees are accountable for their own experience, or at least they have to be partially accountable for their own experience. It's a shared experience. And so when you're action planning, a very simple technique that you can use is that oftentimes when we're action planning, when we're sitting with a team or a group or an individual, we ask one question, and the question really is, what can we do to, what thing can we work on to help improve your engagement the most? And we generally ends up meaning, what can the manager do? What should the organization do? What should the teammates do? But it ends up being a lot of, here's a list of things that I would like to see changed or fixed that would make me more engaged. To introduce accountability into this process, don't stop there. Add a second question. And the second question is, what are you willing to do or to give in order to get those things? So you might have a list of 30 things that they just told you, or maybe it's 10 things that they told you that they want in order to be more engaged. But then the question is, what are they willing to put in the game? Because in order for this to work, it has to be a shared accountability. Employees are participating in creating their own environment. The degree to which they're participating, bringing them full selves, their energy, their optimism, their positivity, whatever it is, if they're not engaging, the chances of being successful in creating an engaging environment is very low. And so they need to understand that they have an accountability in creating their own environment as well. And the degree to which you can start to shift this thinking over time to helping them understand that, yes, the manager is a big part of this, but it's a shared responsibility. It's a shared accountability. You can really move the needle regardless of what engagement survey you're using or what engagement approach you're using, or even if you're not using an engagement survey, you can have the same conversation with a group of employees, like how can we make your experience more engaging, and what are you willing to do to get that? Those two questions are a powerful combination to start introducing accountability into that discussion. Your fourth recommendation is to really work with the willing. And what that means, very simply, is that we need to be, without apology, investing and putting our time and energies and money into our best and brightest. We need to be sort of going all in on our drivers. And so, from a survey perspective, if you can differentiate, or if you do differentiate between your best employees and the rest, listen intently to the best. And if they, look at their engagement, look for where there's opportunities, look at, the things that they say are strengths, make sure you protect those ferociously. Look for the areas that they tell you are problems or where they need tools or resources, and get those to them. Because when you impact the engagement of your drivers, they reward you. They reward you with impact. They reward you sort of exponentially for that investment. We know that. We've been teaching this for a long time. I mean, there's a lot of, we talk about investing in your best people, investing, that's where we should be putting our time and energy. But it's sort of much easier said than done. We know that. The other benefit of investing with your most accountable, your most highly valuable employees, the ones that are driving your company, is that by investing there, you send a message to the organization that that's who's going to get the love. And as human beings, and this starts very early, we know, we go to where love is. We're sort of compelled in that direction. And what that, we know that with I have a toddler at home, and I know that if he's not getting enough attention, he misbehaves. When he misbehaves, he always gets our undivided attention. And so, that's, if you're giving your attention to the misbehaviors, that's what people do to get more attention. If you're giving your attention to those that are driving the business forward, then people start to get the message that, hey, if I'm going to get attention, if I'm going to get the love, I've got to step up. I've got to find a way to play at a different level. And so you can compel and sort of create momentum in that direction. The fifth recommendation in how to sort of bring accountability into this process to drive results is that somewhere along the line, we decided that it was okay to be disengaged, and that it was our responsibility as an organization or as a leader or as an HR department to engage the disengaged. We took that on as a challenge. And the reality is, engagement, when you think about engagement is, when we talk about measurement, and different people will define it a little bit differently, but ultimately engagement is the amount of effort that an individual employee is choosing to give you. Right? We will say it's discretionary effort voluntarily given, but the voluntarily given part is that I'm choosing to give you my discretionary effort. I'm choosing to go above and beyond. I'm choosing to sort of be all in with the company, right? That I'm giving my talents and my abilities to the organization. But it's a choice. And so we're doing great harm, I think, to ourselves, and frankly, I think we're doing great harms to our employees by, sort of coming to this place where we look and we look at numbers, and you've all seen this if you've been studying and reading about engagement, which I'm sure you have. You'll see these numbers that suggest that something like maybe 20% of our employee population is engaged, something like 65% of the employee population is disengaged, but they're still coming to work. We usually say, well, they're showing up to collect their paycheck, and then 15% is actively disengaged. I mean, these are the people that are, angry enough to voice their disdain about the organization, to sort of be actively engaged in, causing harm. And I have found it interesting that we look at that and say, wow, we really need to move more people into the engagement bucket, and then we sort of do these surveys and these actions to move that, when the reality is that engagement is a choice. And so we stopped somewhere holding employees accountable for that decision. And so when we're having discussions, we need to be okay, and we need to sort of give our managers the coaching and training and the support or permission to have conversations with their team that if they have an employee that is disengaged, that's clearly disengaged, or that isn't plugged in, that they can sit them down and say, hey, hey, John, it doesn't appear like you're really engaged lately, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. And a lot of times from John, depending on the relationship you have, John may say, well, yeah, I just have been a little frustrated, or maybe my heart hasn't been in it lately, and you'll hear a variety of different excuses for why they aren't disengaged. Generally, they won't hide that they're sort of disengaged. But I think what's harmful is that as managers, we've come to sort of believe that it's our responsibility to try to get them to make a different, to sort of somehow, magically get them to make a different decision. And the most effective way to get them to make a different decision is really to just hold them accountable for that decision they're making, because they've made a decision to disengage, and that decision is renewed every day. So the question you can pose to them is, okay, John, I understand that, we've gotten here however we've gotten here. Talk to me about what is your plan to get re-engaged? And put that question out and let John talk to you, and let John tell you what the plan is. And if John says that, my heart's really not in it, I'm not sure what I can do, then you can say, you can respond with, great, John, then I'm assuming you have a plan for transition, that you're working on a plan to either find a different, role within the organization that maybe would engage you better, or a different role, a different organization that would be more engaging. And a lot of times that'll kind of jar them, right? They might be a little sort of struck by that suggestion, but it's important to let them know that there is not a third option. Right, we're going to take the third option off the table. We have to, as leaders, start holding individuals accountable for choosing to be disengaged. Right, we're either in or we're out. We have to start making that a choice that we make, because by allowing it, we're doing ourselves a lot of harm, and frankly, we're also making it less fun. You all know, like, managing a group of disengaged employees isn't much fun. It's a lot of drama, it's a lot of headache, and it's a lot of pain, and it doesn't result in tremendous results. And so those are your 5 recommendations. And so let's just, sort of recap sort of what we came here today to talk about. And it was, what really is driving employee performance. And despite sort of what a lot of us have been led to believe, engagement isn't driving performance. Engagement may be in certain circumstances correlated with performance, and I think there's good evidence that that's the case. But overall, that there's something more going on. And there's a much stronger case, we believe, that if you invest in cultivating personal accountability, in developing and sort of rewarding and recognizing accountability and building that within your organization, that you'll see increased engagement and you'll see increased performance. And the way we do that is, let's stop surveying the victims, right? Let's start making sure that when we are surveying, that we can differentiate between the voices of our most valuable, most accountable employees and the others, so that we can pay close attention to what they're saying and make sure that we're taking care of what they need, that we can fix the right stuff, that we're not running off and fixing circumstances, that we're action planning differently by creating a joint accountability, that we are work the willing by investing on those that are driving our business forward, and frankly, that we're no longer going to allow engagement to be an option anymore. It's not an optional choice. So I noticed that I am running short on time. I am going to sort of shoot ahead here for just a second to talk quickly about, for those that don't know who we are, Bulletproof Talent, we're a fairly new organization. We came onto the scene last year. What we do is we do offer an employee engagement survey that we're the only survey in the industry that incorporates in an objective measure of personal accountability into the process, so that we can help you really get focused in a very specific, objective way on who your most accountable employees are and what they're saying and how that differentiates from the rest. We also offer leadership training solutions rooted in our reality-based leadership philosophy that was created by our founder, Cy Wakeman, and that's really sort of based on a foundation of personal accountability. And finally, we have an HR consulting practice that we help organizations who are trying to understand how to build more effective reality-based HR, for everything from recruiting through to leadership development. So that's a little bit about who we are. And for those that want to, I'm going to, if you want to hang around for a moment, I will try and field a few of these questions. For those of you that need to jump off the call, here is my contact information. If you have specific questions, or specific feedback about this, or if you'd like to engage me directly on some questions, feel free to email. I'm happy to answer that. You can tour our website. If you like this kind of content and you're not on our email list, please feel free to join. But I very much appreciate you joining us today, and I hope that you have a tremendous afternoon. And with that, I'll dive in on some of the questions here now. If some of you want to stick around, I'm happy to give a few extra minutes. For those of you that need to take off, I appreciate you stopping by. So let's dive in. A few questions. Let's see. I think we already got that, so let's go here. We talked about the slides. Let's talk about, should you not account for the work improvement activities as a driver of better business performance? I think that's a great question, and know that we don't sort of view employee engagement as being an end-all, be-all of business performance or improvement, but that it is a part of it. So certainly there are other things that would account for business improvement. So I'm not going to, certainly not going to suggest that this is the only driver, because there's always, there's ways to improve work. We're sort of talking about when you get into sort of the area that maybe is the area that gets into the discretionary part of the employee effort, I guess, the part that, the choices employees are making about what they give and how they engage. That's really the domain that we're playing in today. So I don't mean to suggest that this is an end-all be-all, because it is certainly not. It says, so in the true story chart, is performance equal business outcomes / success metrics? Yes. That was the metric that I was using there actually was a profit per employee, which was how we how we measured our performance, was on a sort of profit per employee basis. So we were getting more efficient and more profitable at the same time. So yes, that was how that was measured. I did get a question. I love this from Linda. Are you saying our employees are teenagers? No. I was simply making the argument that perhaps the way that we go about impacting performance is using the teenager as an example. But no, I'm not saying your employees are teenagers. However, I do think that the practice of engagement and accountability will work on people at essentially any age. So I think they are like teenagers in that regard. Next question is, the only ways to change mindsets, what is the data you have to back that up? That is probably a bigger question to dig into than today, but I think that changing mindsets is such a broad category, and it gets into so many different approaches. But I think at the end of the day, and maybe that's a fair statement. Let me back up for a second. If you're challenging the notion that the only way to sustainable business results is changing employee mindsets, perhaps there are some other elements in there, and maybe that was a little bit too much of an absolute statement. But what I would say is that probably the most effective way at substantially changing the trajectory of your company's results for the best is changing mindset. So I would make that argument, and if you'd like to engage me offline on that, I'd be happy to have that discussion, and I'd be happy to take on that challenge. Right. Whether the whatever it takes results in dead bodies or bad behavior or temperament, what then? And that's, I think, a very good comment. I think that's going back to talking about we're talking about personal accountability and the commitment element of personal accountability as it relates to sort of being all in or whatever it takes to get results. And certainly there's an element of appropriateness and legal and moral and all of those kinds of things. But I think the idea being that I guess, without saying that, we would assume that we're saying whatever it takes within reason or within sort of the integrity or the morals or, sort of boundaries of appropriateness. So, but that's a good point. I think sometimes, it's easy to sort of think, like, when we say whatever it takes, does that mean we can bend the rules? Let's see. So we have heard Sai say, don't go from silence to violence. So if we are just working on the concepts and starting to train, will you have any webinars that provide more strategies on coaching training for commitment, resilience, ownership, and continuous learning? And actually, yes, we've already done some of those, and we'll continue to offer more. If you're interested in that and you're interested in implementing some accountability training on your own, one of the places I might recommend you start in terms of a resource is we put a free web or a free white paper out called now I'm blank. Accountability is not a dirty word. If you go to our website under the resources link, there'll be a white paper option, and you can download that for free. That's a great start. We also had a couple of other webinars. I don't know if you sat in on those with Sai, where she talked a little bit about some of this. So yes, we do have some of that available to you. And if you'd like some more guidance on that, feel free to please email me. I'd be happy to respond to that. So I think that is all of our questions. So thank you for all of those. I very much appreciate it. If you have additional questions and would like to sort of reach out and grab me to engage on some of those, I'd be happy to take those. I look forward to hearing more from you later. Have a great week. Thanks.